Chapter 25. You have got to be kidding. Seth. You need to pull Bahamut out more often. This has been the best damn month so far. The group was sitting on the beaches of Costa del Sol in the VR room with the other members of the Deae, simply taking a mini vacation away from the freezing snow that was blanketing the castle grounds. Since last month, when Sephiroth had pulled Bahamut Divine out on Umbridge, no one had dared to make a move against him, not even the fat toad. She had been quiet. Almost a little too quiet. The students that weren't part of the Deae stayed well away from Sephiroth or made sure to really watch what they said around the man. Which he didn't mind. The teachers also didn't seem as inclined to mess with him, Snape included. Their occlumency classes had actually been going well, or maybe Snape simply wasn't powerful enough to penetrate Sephiroth's mind now that he had full control of himself. Their first lesson, when he was still awakening, he had been able to sense Snape's presence in his mind, just he didn't want to kick him out cause he unlocked memories. This time, however, Sephiroth was in full control and he found expelling the man extremely easy. Jenova, on the other hand, she had made 2 more attempts over the past month to take over her son's mind once more. This time though it was becoming harder as she was much weaker and Sephiroth wasn't as mentally unstable as he had been prior. Her last attempt last week had nearly succeeded in overwhelming him as he had been emotionally compromised. He had nearly given in to the old bloodlust when Umbridge had banned Quidditch. It had only been the littlest remnant that had pulled him back from the brink. They might not have shared a soul anymore, but the smallest one still seemed to share a connection with him. It made sense since Kadaj had been the closest to him before, which also explained why his new nickname was Leech, as the boy leeched onto him whenever he could. And speaking of Leech, feeling a weight on his chest, Sephiroth pulled up his sunglasses, his eyes instantly meeting those of his youngest. Yes, even they got him referring to them as his children. As disturbing as that was, it fit. What is it, Kadaj? And here he thoughtless and his childishness was bad. Kadaj was a temperamental little shit, but he did love him. He loved all 3, but Yazoo seemed to be the one he could handle the best. Dad. Can we come with you for Christmas? A single silver brow rose as Sephiroth looked to his youngest. Kadaj, I'm staying here as I do every year. You can't, father. Umbridge announced that all children must return home this year. To their actual homes. Yazoo had moved in behind his brother, as faithfully following behind. Sephiroth simply shrugged, laying back down on the beach blanket he was spread out on next to Genesis. I'll just go to Snuffles then. The triplets sent each other nervous looks, wondering how badly Daddy Dearest was going to flip on this. New ministry rule, Dad. You have to go back to your guardians for Christmas. Les shrunk back, as did Yazoo, as Sephiroth slowly pushed himself up onto his elbows, Kadaj now on his waist. I narrowed in the darkest glare. The ministry is forcing me back to the Dursleys? A very slow, very evil smile crossed his lips as he laid back down, pulling and glasses back down. Genesis looked to his lover, a feeling of dread filling his stomach. He knew that look all too well. The Dursleys were fucked. The Great Hall was filled with the chatter of students, many not so happy with the new law that had been put in effect. Most of the students that normally would have stayed were the loudest about this new rule, as there was a reason they didn't go home over the holidays. The others were because this prevented them from traveling to relatives' houses like they normally would have. The train was due to leave in the next hour and the students were finishing up their breakfast. Seth, are you sure this is a good idea? It's obvious what she is doing. Angel whispered over his eyes, sweeping across the hall looking for the toad. Oh, I know. Sephiroth whispered back, munching on a candy bar Genesis had brought him last night. Dumbledore knows as well and called me up to his office last night. There are wards around the Dursleys' place that prevent people from entering. Besides, I don't plan on staying there. I want to see Snuffles. He also wasn't going to be alone. Vincent in animagus form was going to be with him at almost all times after he arrived at the Dursleys. Besides, Dad is going to be there with me the whole time. And if I know my 3 hellions, they won't be far off either. Kadaj, Yazoo and Liz were heading for Grimwald Place. He found out they were actually adopted by Lazard's family. Lazard was actually German-born, but his parents were American military and were stationed in Japan right now, where they found the 3 boys and adopted them. That had explained why Kadaj had latched on to Sephiroth the way he had. They never knew their birth parents and had been bouncing from foster home to foster home. Sephiroth was the first real concrete family they had. He had written a letter to Sirius explaining the situation as best he could, and the man had agreed to watch over them. Lazard was going to act as a control measure since the boys were not exactly mentally stable. Kadaj still had a tendency to simply want to kill whoever pissed him off. Dad, just kill her and be done with it already. Case in point. Sighing, Sephiroth set a hand on his youngest head, running his fingers through his hair. Kadaj, what did I tell you? That this is a second chance to redeem ourselves of our past sins, and we can't go through and murder anyone. Kadaj all but pouted from his spot next to Sephiroth. It was rare to find the two separated when they weren't in classes. Kadaj was in Cisna and Elena's year. Don't worry, she will get her just deserves. We need to wait until we have the opportunity to vanish from England. Tsank said in a low voice. With the loss of Rufus as a possible spy and the Ministry so dead set on removing Sephiroth from the scene, they were going to stay in Hogwarts until the end of the year. This way it gave them the chance to gather as much intel as they possibly could through the now more than willing Dumbledore. Do you have UPHS? Rude asked, looking to Sephiroth over his glasses. Snorting, Sephiroth shook his head and held his up. They're called cell phones now. Sephiroth, don't be a smartass. Tseng chided playfully. The great hall doors suddenly slammed open, causing everyone in the hall to jump. Whipping around, Sephiroth cursed slightly but smiled, seeing the figure walking down the center of the hall, red coat flaring behind him and a red bag thrown over his shoulder. Merry Christmas, everyone! Genesis shouted, his normal arrogant smirk on his face. Hey, what do you know? Santa's actually hot, you. Moving up to the group, Genesis smacked Trino on the back of his head. Do I look like a fat man in a red suit? You're just not fat. Reno ducked another swipe to the head, causing the others to laugh. The students and teachers over the past month had more than gotten used to Genesis' eccentrics and randomly showing up at Hogwarts. He always managed to show up when Umbridge wasn't around. Hell, half the times they swear he was sending her off beforehand. Lately there had been lots of little explosions all around Hogwarts, and for once it wasn't Trino. So what do you got, Jen? Zack asked absently, poking the bag. It honestly didn't look like it could hold a lot, but anyone that knew the wizarding world knew he could fit Hogwarts in a bag. Hefting the bag from his shoulder, Genesis set it on the ground. If there is one thing I am grateful for when it comes to modern magic, it's featherlight charms and expanding bags. This would have killed even me if I didn't know those. Opening the bag, he pulled out a large red and silver 4-point shuriken. Cisna squealed and leapt across the table, tackling Genesis and ripping the weapon from his hand. Myrika, where did you find it? Cloud made it. Tseng gave him the specs for it and he crafted it. Jiggling, Cisna tested its weight. She wanted to throw it, but in a hall full of students that wouldn't be a good idea. Leaping up in his seat, Zack all but pounced Genesis trying to get to the bag. What did Spiky make for me? Reaching up, both Angela and Sephiroth pulled the hyperactive boy back down. Shaking his head, Genesis looked into the bag and withdrew a massive buster. It was similar in design to the one handed down to him from Angel, but it was a different metal with a slightly different design. He couldn't give you the Buster Sword, so he made you your own. Leaping up from his seat, Zack yipped like a little puppy, grabbing the sword from his hand and sat down on the ground, looking it over like a kid at Christmas. Which wasn't that far off. Is this a good idea? Zachary has a short enough attention span as it is. Now they are giving him a sword that is as big as he is? Phileas was giving the sword a nervous look as he looked at his fellow heads of house. Let's just hope none of these boys decide to break that no killings rule. Severus muttered. He had been there when he heard Sephiroth telling the smaller version of himself that they weren't going to senselessly murder anyone this go-around. The whole clone thing still threw him for a loop, especially when the kids called her Sephiroth father. The teachers watched with worried expression as Genesis handed Reno a metal extending rod that seemed capable of electrocuting someone. They watched in horror as more weapons were handed out. Angel received a sword nearly identical to the one Zack had, though this one seemed a lot older and nearly brought the gentle giant to tears. Rude received a rod similar to Reno but also a pair of gloves with a glowing green materia in the wristband. Elena received a gun which really set them on edge, though not as on edge when Rufus was given a sawed-off shotgun. The remnants, Sephiroth and Tseng, were the only ones to not receive anything. Tseng. Cloud's giving you yours in person. Seph, you already have your sword and so do our boys. But look for something special on Christmas morning. He winked at them and turned, leaving the hall. I'll see you lot in a few days. You can count on it. He wanted to get out of there before Umbridge got back, which he should be after that little goose chase he sent her on. Realizing why Genesis was leaving the group that had received weapons all scattered racing for their trunks. King's Cross, the largest railway in all of London. It was not uncommon to see people waiting around in all forms of dress around Christmas time. No one paid any of those strangely dressed any mind, which worked for the Weasleys just perfectly. Molly was more than anxious to get her hands on her three wayward children. Albus had sent her a small message not too long ago explaining very little about what he knew. He couldn't send a lot, not with the Ministry reading all mail. How Sirius had gotten the letter from Harry she would never know. It had taken them weeks to decode it. This new law that the Ministry had in effect was starting to rub her the wrong way. Sending all the kids home was one thing, but dictating where they went, that just screamed attempt at getting at Harry. And what was worse, she glanced over to the white car a few down that currently had Vernon Dursley standing in front of the trunk. He on the other hand would have no problem handing the boy over to the Ministry. She had brought that up to Albus when he had come by headquarters. He had assured her that Harry was more than capable to handling himself against the Ministry. She didn't like it. Not one bit, but she knew to trust Dumbledore. Mum. Jumping slightly, Molly didn't have time to brace for impact as she was slammed into and picked up by a massive man. Blinking rapidly, she looked down and could only stare in awe as she easily recognized her own child. Fred? Smiling brightly, Zack set the woman down and stepped back, absently rubbing the back of his head. Yeah. Hi, Mum. Shell-shocked Molly reached up, making Fred turn his head this way and that, looking him over. You don't look anything like Fred anymore. She knew from Dumbledore's encrypted letter that 3 of her children had been chosen to become the host for reincarnates of souls that deserved a second chance. Even knowing that though, it didn't prepare her for actually seeing the changes in her babies. Yeah. Sorry about that, Mom. We didn't have a choice on who we were reborn to. Molly shook her head, running her fingers through his spiky black hair. No, you may look different, but you will always be my Fred. Now, where are your brothers and sister? Right here, Ma. Reno swaggered over with his normal laze and swept down, giving Molly a big hug. Smiling up at him, Molly looked George over. She hardly recognized him. What are these? She asked, running her fingers along the red tattoos under his eyes. Tattoos, yo? Didn't feel right not having them. He had them as Reno as well, Mum. He honestly didn't look right without them. Zack chimed in, folding his arms behind his head. Reno. Molly looked up at her son, a soft sad smile on her face. That's your Reed name, isn't it? Kinda. Reno pulled a face. He hated his real name. Why his mother named him that he would never know. Reno was my call name as a Turk. My real name will go with me to the grave. Unless Boss Man opened his mouth, Tseng was the only other person in all of Shinra that knew his real name. Fred? Molly asked, turning back to her other little hellion. Zack Fair. Born and raised in Gongaga. Little tropical farming town. Reno was born and raised in the slums of Midrija. Everyone lovingly calls him Slum Rat. Reno snorted and rolled his eyes. Fitting name actually, considering I was better off being raised by the slum rats than my drug-addicted prostitute of a mother. Reno shook his head and looked back towards where their group was standing. Hey Saisnai, hurry your beautiful ass up. Reno, I swear to Gaia, you comment on my ass one more time, I'm removing it. Moving away from the group, Saisnai walked over and hugged her mother tightly. It's good to see you again, Mom. I'm sorry it had to wait till now to tell you all this. It's alright, baby girl. There is no reason to apologize, you never have a need to apologize for something like this. Now let me look at you. She stepped back, she looked over her baby girl and smiled. She was such a beautiful young woman. Now where is Harry, dear? She knew he had gone through the biggest transformation. Sirius and Remus had prepared a little for what she was about to see, but the beauty that moved out to her when he was called ... was not it. A faint flush creeped up Molly's cheeks as Harry came to stand in front of her. Hello, Mrs. Weasley. Even his voice had changed, dropping several octaves deeper, and it became smoother. She reached up to hug him but found herself stopped by her two boys. Fred, George? It's all right, Reno. Zach. Sephiroth turned back to Mrs. Weasley and smiled gently. They are just looking out for you. I'm not one that likes to be touched by people I don't know. But I have known you long enough, I do not mind. Leaning down, he hugged her gently, being very mindful of his soldier strength. It's all right, Harry dear. Or should I call you Sephiroth? He pulled back, smiling gently, though she was greatly unnerved by what Harry had become. Sephiroth, if you do not mind. I'm sorry I have to cut this short, but I do not wish to have my Vernon waiting any longer. No, he wanted this done and over with. Of course, dear, you know how to reach us if you need to. Picking his trunk up, Sephiroth turned acid green eyes meeting dark brown of Vernon Dursley.
I'm glad you enjoyed that video/gameplay. Just remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, goodbye!